Welcome to lecture 1. What is physiology? So, welcome to my office. Here's my bookshelf. You folks will see throughout the session here. It's my daughter's fort. It's a big cardboard box. And so how we design now our lectures is you folks are going to see that I always have chapters within the lecture. So this is lecture 1. Our first lecture. But you folks see on the screen here is there are 4 topics. What is physiology? What is homeostasis? How do we maintain homeostasis? And how we figured all this stuff out. And so what I do is I make what we call lecturettes. So I'm going to lecture what is physiology, and then I'm going to stop. I'm going to make a link of that so that the lecture becomes smaller in these more digestible chunks, which is what student feedback told me they like it. Sometimes when I make one long lecture, the students tell me like, oh my God, it was so long. You could press pause. But anyway, you folks or your previous folks asked for this format, and so here it is. There will be sometimes my daughter comes busting in here. I got a 2-year-old. And for the most part, I spend hours editing those disruptions out. Sometimes I do have to lead them in, and I apologize if this is distracting to you. Majority of you folks will love it. There will be a couple of you folks that don't like it because you don't like kids. But please understand that taking or recording one lecture sometimes takes me a couple days. And so it's hours for me to edit all this stuff in. So sometimes it's just better for me to just leave in the interruption. You folks ready? Let's get started. All right, the first thing we have to do is define physiology. So when you look at physiology in its root terms, right? So for looking at the Latin and Greek roots, it means natural causes or some phenomenon, right? And so when you interpret that in today's words, physiology is when we study how a living organism functions. And not only how it functions, all its component parts. Okay. And so physiology will focus on mechanisms. And what that means is how a process works, much like the car of an engine, right? So how does the engine work? And in doing so, you have to look at all the chemical and physical properties and processes that are involved in how something works. And that's why you had to take chemistry and take anatomy, right? Before you took physiology. Now, there are 2 main themes in physiology, and they are a pattern that you folks are going to see over and over throughout this entire course. And so the first theme is structure determines function. Okay. And if you folks have had me for anatomy, I drill this into what does it look like? Because what it looks like will tell you what it does. Okay. So a function now is the study of mechanisms. Here's that word again. Okay. You folks are going to have a deep relationship with mechanisms by the time this course is over. Now, mechanism, or we say mechanisms of actions, what that does is you're going to describe exactly how the function is accomplished, right? Which is a series now of cause and effects or steps. Now, another theme is homeostasis, right? And we're going to be talking about homeostasis the entire course. And homeostasis now is how we maintain the internal stability of our body. For example, we have to maintain a stable or somewhat stable body temperature. We can't get too cold, that's hypothermia, and we can't get too hot, that's a fever, is because our cells will start to die. So homeostasis allows us now to have that internal stability to maintain or to sustain life, right? Now, let's go into structure determines functions, right? So here we go, physiological functions. Now, when we say function, in other words, we're asking, what does it do? What does a process do? What does a protein do? What does a certain channel do? What does that cell do? Okay, so that's what we're looking at. And so the second thing is, in order to understand what something does, we have to know what the structures are that carry out that function. In other words, who are the players, right? So a lot of you folks are football fans, basketball fans, right? But in order to understand the game, you got to know what the players are, right? Forward, guard, okay? But not only that, you have to know what those players do in order to understand the game. Now, we also have to describe exactly how the function is accomplished. And that's what we mean by mechanism of action, right? How does it do it? So these are the three trends or three items that I want you folks to pay attention to as we're learning the material. Anytime I introduce a new process to you, right? You have to know, what is the function of that process? Who are the players for that process? And then taking all of that information, be able to describe succinctly, right? The mechanism of action, what those players are doing, how they do it in order to now describe the overall function of a process. Okay, so let me give you folks an example of how to put this all into play. So here's a picture of my daughter. This was last year. She's a little bit bigger than this now. And let's look at this bike. Okay, so I'm going to ask you folks, what is the overall function of a bike? Okay, that's big picture. And then, who are the players? And then ask yourself, what is the mechanism of action of these players? Okay, so I want you folks to press pause. Do this on your own. Don't just listen to the answer. If you're just listening to the answer, you're not training well. Okay, it's because our goal this semester is to be able to look at a process, say what the function is, the overall function, break down all the players, and then know what each player is doing in order to explain the overall function. You folks are going to be straight up mechanics at the end of this course. You're going to strip the engine down, tell me what each part does, and build the engine back together. Okay, so press pause and then come back and we'll go over the answer. Okay, hopefully you press pause. So the overall function, and this is not the only answers, this is just the answers I came up with in a short, quick time, is the function of a bike. And right now, this is not a pedal bike, this is a push bike with feet, is, you know, if I want to go somewhere, right? Transportation. Maybe I want to exercise. Maybe I want to have fun or whatever you folks put, some movement of some sort. That's what bikes are for. Now, what are the players? So here, I stripped this bike apart, okay? Because in order for me to have transportation, the players here are the wheels, the frame, the handlebars, the seat. And in this case, because it's a pedal bike via feet, or a push bike, I should say, then I got to have a person with said feet and legs, okay? Now, let's break down this mechanism of action. So here, the frame allows us now to connect the handlebars, the seat, the wheels. If the person sits on the seat, they can then place their hands on the handlebars and then put their feet on the ground. Now let's address the person, right? So the person sitting on the seat can flex their leg while planting the feet on the ground. And in doing so, it's going to cause the wheels to turn, which then leads to propels bike forward. You folks are going to see a lot of notation. I do mind mapping, which is a good tool I'm going to teach you folks. But anytime you see an arrow, that means leads to, okay? Causes the wheels to turn, which leads to propulsion of bike moving forward, right? Now, the person now can turn the handlebars in the direction they want to move while doing number 3. So that's the mechanism of action. Now, you folks should see is I have now addressed all the players. I didn't miss any player, right? And I put it all in bold. So some common errors that I see is when a student leaves out a key concept, okay? Or some players, like the frame, right? Or your explanation of the mechanism of action is unclear. It's very vague. This is a very detailed orientated class, right? So details are very important. All right, that's it for your first lecturette. I'll meet you back for lecturette 2. We're going to talk about homeostasis.